Okay, so I had done a series on this, and this was done a while ago, but when I posted it just now in April 2025, one good subscriber, Liberty Springs something, commented, sent me a personal comment. I think it was personal, that there was some scratchy sound, some static in the recording. So I'm redoing this. Obviously, the content is the same, but it will sound a little different because I'm coming back to this after a while. We were talking about various evolutionary aspects and how that those traits inhibit or favor cooperation, conserving biodiversity, and ultimately climate action. So this is called continuities and discontinuities in the cultural evolution of global consciousness. What does it mean? It's a nice paper, so you can read up. It's a nice topic as well. Consciousness by itself is very intriguing and gets debated a lot. Global consciousness is something else. But in our context, I titled this podcast as Is there a global consciousness that favors climate action, just to make it more exciting. Global consciousness encompassing cosmopolitan orientation, global orientations, that is openness to multicultural experiences, and identification with all humanity is a relatively stable individual difference that is strongly associated with pro-environmental attitudes and behaviors, less in-group favoritism or, ethnic tendencies, tribal mentality, and also prejudice and greater pandemic prevention, safety behaviors, etc. So when something like a pandemic happened, we lived through it, somehow managed it. A lot of people died, of course, including my own father. But when you say we should all wear masks, some people say, yes, that's a good idea and wear it. Whereas there will be groups saying, why should I wear a mask? It's like riding a bicycle and wearing a helmet, and people say, I want to be free and I don't want to wear a helmet. But if you have a crash and then somebody has to pay for your hospital expenses, then it's not your personal freedom anymore. That is the sole consideration, right? So little is known about how it is socialized in everyday life, using stratified samples from 6 societies, socializing institution factors correlating positively with global consciousness were education, white collar work and its higher income, and religiosity. So it's a kind of a strange mix. Religion also tends to split people, and yet many people get positive energy out of it. But it's always, kind of tricky to say white collar work and education, because you'll find plenty of poor people, uneducated, blue collar work, and they are just as conscious and open to multicultural experiences as these educated white collar workers. So it's not that strong wall. However, GC also decreased with increasing age, contradicting a wisdom of elders' transmission of social learning and not replicating typical findings that general pro-sociality increases with age. An old statement, I think attributed to Winston Churchill maybe, that says, if you're young and conservative, you are heartless, and if you are old and liberal, then you are brainless. But generally, older people tend to get more stodgy, maybe. Longitudinal findings were that empathy building, network enhancing elements like getting married or welcoming a new infant increased global consciousness, or GC, the most across a 3-month interval. Instrumental gains like receiving a promotion or getting a better job also showed positive effects. Less intuitively, death of a close other enhanced rather than reduced GC. Perhaps this was achieved through ritualized management of meaning, where a sense of the smallness of self is associated with growth of empathy for the human condition as a more discontinuous or opportunistic form of culture-based learning. This article is part of the theme that we have been looking at. As I said, I've come back to this after a while. So let's read some of the text. I hope this time the sound will be good. I will check and I will repost Liberty Springs. Thank you. the past century has witnessed such unprecedented, multifaceted, and pervasive human-driven planetary change that a working group of the International Geological Society recommended that the Anthropocene be established as a new geological epoch with a start date in the mid 20th century. Of course, the idea was rejected by the committee, that experts in geological society that decide whether a new epoch should be defined or not. The signal event of the Anthropocene is climate change manufactured by human activity, with average planetary temperature projected to rise. I will skip those kind of guessworks. The environmental unsustainability of the current trajectory means that theories of cultural evolution centering around continuities of intergenerational social learning could usefully be augmented by a political psychology that identifies moments of potential and actual discontinuity that could be leveraged for social, institutional, and personal change. Elsewhere in the sustainability course I am posting right now, we are looking at social change to move to a desired state, a preferred state of resilience and sustainable development. We discuss global consciousness as an individual difference, especially adaptive for the human species to survive and thrive in the Anthropocene. GC and the related concepts are strongly related to pro-environmental attitudes and behaviors and cross-national cooperation. We review what macro features of society induce GC to grow or decline, but argue further that discontinuity in individual and collective lives might open up a window for reconceptualizing the forms of experiential meaning that give rise to GC. So gratitude, GC, and empathy, and so on are very contextual. As I just saw a movie called The Conclave, or just Conclave, and I loved a line there that says, certainty is the enemy of tolerance and also faith, because faith comes out of doubt. If you have certainty, then you don't need faith, and so on. But also empathy itself also is sacrificed by people who are certain about everything or feel invincible in some way. In other words, in the words of Charles Darwin, as cited in Richards, although a high standard of morality gives but a slight or no advantage, although a high standard of morality gives but a slight or no advantage to each individual man and his children over the other men of the same tribe, yet that an advancement in the standard of morality and an increase in the number of well-endowed men will certainly give an immense advantage of one tribe over another. So you can see how intra-group differences in morality standards, etc., exist, because having a higher standard of morality within the group may not give you an advantage. But if you are seen as a group as being more virtuous and moral, then you may have advantage over another tribe. Okay, this work builds on the effort to develop quantitative measures of what McFarland et al. Ecumenically termed global human identification and citizenship. I'm skipping ahead, I am obviously being brief again. These encompass a wide range of measures that arguably fit with Liu and McDonald's definition of GC as a knowledge of both the interconnectedness and difference of humankind and a will to take moral actions in a reflexive manner on its behalf. GC is cosmopolitan, incorporating a global prosociality, which is a willingness to help others regardless of whether they share an in-group with the self, and also respect for and willingness to preserve cultural diversity. It's fundamentally open towards acquiring knowledge about other cultures, other peoples, and other ways of life. Conversely, GC is not defensive about maintaining ethnic purity or anxious and fearful about interacting with others different from oneself. GC includes a feeling of we-ness and identification with all humanity, including both bonding with and concern for all humanity. Measured as a composite, GC has good test-retest reliability, so reproducibility, and predicts cooperation across national boundaries on a range of behavioral indicators rather than being narrowly defined by a particular theoretical orientation or literature. Most relevant to the current research, it is a person-centered measure that allows researchers to track personal change longitudinally as a function of life experiences. This plays out in many ways. Right now, US is having all kinds of battles on the economic front with even neighbors like Canada, and they have been good friends for a long time. Will this current political situation affect that underlying trust and respect and so on? It's not clear right now. So let's read a bit about learning global consciousness. We examine how learning affects GC correlationally through one's position in societal structures that reproduce social learning over the lifespan, and dynamically through longitudinal analysis of the occurrences of major life events that may result in disruptions and discontinuities in the immediate short term. However, jumping ahead, there is a dearth of theory that seeks to explain what might happen to GC when negative but unavoidable events like illness, a death in the family, or economic downturns in life occur. So if a bunch of people got fired at an agency and some people held on to a job for whatever reason, then how does this affect our GC in that context? Only in the domain of death is there a clear theory-based hypothesis. From terror management theory, mortality salience is perceived as a source of threat that activates a defensive worldview, including outgroup stereotypes and prejudice that should in turn decrease GC. However, most of the research on TMT, threat management theory, uses experiments with American undergraduates, and mortality salience effects are not uniform across other situations and demographics. So obviously when you start saying life's experiences affect GC, increase it or decrease it, then it's very contextual and maybe even cultural, right? So what are the results of their study? Relationship between global consciousness and demographics. We employed a latent profile analysis to incorporate the 3 scales and 7 subscales relevant to GC. As a 3-profile solution, high GC, medium GC, and low GC was selected as the optimal model in a previous study using the same data set. We used this solution as the base to examine the association between GC profiles and key demographic variables. A 3-step approach was used for this purpose. So there is some details here, omega squared, etc., that I have skipped in terms of the equations and the analysis. But looking at the relationship between global consciousness and life experiences, so just think about how they are trying to quantify GC and demographics, GC and life experiences. To examine the impact of life events on GC, a set of latent transition analysis were estimated using the robust likelihood estimator. Only those participants who responded in both wave 1 and wave 2 surveys were included, etc. My main point is that this is not just a theoretical conceptual argument. They have actually collected and used the data and done analysis to look for various ways in which global GC is affected by demographics and life experiences and so on. Jumping ahead, of course, they have to also depend on age, as we said. With aging, the GC doesn't necessarily go up. So percentage of GC profiles, 100% adding up with low GC, medium GC, and high GC for 20-year-olds and younger. So you can see high GC dominates, but as you age, high GC drops, and there is some transition here. So it seems to decrease up to certain level, and maybe if you live long enough, then you see your friends dying, people in your group and other groups dying, and maybe GC grows, but then it crashes again after 80 years. Whereas white collar jobs and other jobs, you can see there is a difference, and obviously they are convinced that these are statistically significant differences, but the sample size matters a lot, and there may be a cultural context to the differences between white collar jobs and other jobs. So are there cultures which are more flat in terms of the difference between white collar jobs and other jobs? We don't know that in this study. That's not explored much. Okay, so life experiences on overall advance rate of global consciousness, those who experienced this event and those who did not experience. I won't go into the details, but just looking at those who experienced and those who did not experience, you can see GC can be very different. So here you're looking at marriage and new relationship, new family member, job promotion, close others died, educational achievement, close others fall ill, financial setback, new or better jobs, other, relocation, divorced or relationship troubles, job insecurity, retirement, empty nest, new activities, and so on. So you can see in some of these, those who did not experience the event have higher global consciousness than those who did experience this event. So it depends probably also again on age, because when elderly people get moved, let's say because the kids are moving and kids cannot take care of the parents unless they are closer, then the people who got displaced forcibly can begin to have lower GC, maybe lowered GC. Okay, so just to jump ahead and look at the discussion, I just wanted to give you a sense that global consciousness is a concept that can be quantified with these metrics that we looked at, and the study has many details that you can look up if you are interested. But you want to somehow translate this to pro-environmental behavior, support for climate action, paying taxes to support climate action, or following rules and regulations, or being tolerant of people who are suffering from climate change impacts, and so on and so forth. As humanity moves into the Anthropocene epoch, it is apparent that industry as usual is unsustainable. So business as usual is not something that we can carry on forever without causing serious damages, inequities, injustices, and so on. One factor opening up possibilities for a more sustainable future is the emergence of global consciousness. Given its relative weakness compared to more established forms like national or local identities, GC cannot grow simply through social learning and imitation. Those such forms of cultural continuity have a place in the overall concept. This research found that several established institutions across 6 societies contributed to GC in a significant way. These were education, white-collar work, and the higher and more regular income associated with it, so some sense of security, and religiosity. So religion is always complex. People seek it because they are not certain, but it can drive hatred of other religions or tolerance, and so on. Some culturally continuous aspects of industrialized society can contribute to GC, but there is also discontinuity, the most obvious evidence of which is the decrease of GC with increasing age. Okay, this suggests a cohort effect where younger people are learning from the peers and through mass media rather than imitating their elders. So the influence of the parents begin to degrade at some point. Let's say when you go to middle school and high school and social media comes in and you are getting information from all sources, and then confirmation bias can be positive or negative as well. So there are many issues. The more innovative but also more tentative part of this research revealed that both positive and negative life experiences contributed to the growth of GC over the 3-month longitudinal period measured. Not surprisingly, positive empathy building, network enhancing elements like getting married or welcoming a new infant were the most GC enhancing events reported. Instrumental gains like receiving a promotion or getting a better job also showed positive longitudinal effects, and you have to also figure out how long these last. If they are a spike and then they disappear, let's say with aging, then obviously you have to be careful about. Maybe when they are feeling high GC, you get a lot of the climate action done, and then you say, okay, now you go, enjoy your declining GC, right? If GC is a cohort effect rather than a maturation effect, then it must be tied to specific forms of learning and experience. In this era, higher and more regular income affords a wider range of experiences and access to things that may serve to expand horizons. Education can be mind-opening in any era, but especially true in the present one when innovations occur regularly and are documented so they can be institutionally transmitted to a new cohort. These may be features of cultural evolution in the Anthropocene, where all sorts of innovations are regularly recorded and widely disseminated and diffused. GC may be particularly adaptive in an era where access to innovation is easy and the rewards for being open to new people and things generally outweigh the risks of encountering the unfamiliar. But the way immigration issues play out, there is a limit to how this works. So if immigrants are somehow your own type of people, color, religion, language, whatever, then maybe you are less anxious about allowing them in than completely different groups. But GC is more than a product of power, plenty, and security as well as industry. It's also a vessel for meaning making, where forming a marriage, adding a new family member, or losing a beloved are used to articulate wider forms of interconnectedness that might be discontinuous with what went before. GC appears to have a fundamentally social component to it that may be a product of evolutionary origins. We are basically a social animal. It appears oriented to not only expanding human social networks, this was a critical element in the rise of our species to planetary dominance, and may become an important element of our shared future, where we learn to craft more sustainable narratives about ourselves so that we use our ability to consume energy like crazy and create this global warming and climate impacts, and then dial back and come towards sustainability using the same evolutionary traits. So that's the kind of optimistic message. Global consciousness is part of our evolutionary trait. It is very contextual, depends on job, income, who you are surrounded with, who are coming in, and so on. But it seems like there are ways in which the levers which can be used to enhance GC and maybe get more pro-social behaviors and drive climate action. And there are other podcasts I have which talk about what are the levers that you can use to cause social tipping points, so that, let's say, we go from being inherently polluters and consumers and energy use people to doing everything much more consciously, maybe like smoking being a stigma at some level. Can polluting also become a stigma? So GC can hopefully save us from ourselves someday. Okay, let's leave it here.